The rain started late in the afternoon, a steady drizzle that seemed to darken the whole city. By the time I arrived at Obi's apartment, the rain was pouring down hard, the streets gleaming with reflections of the city lights. I stood there for a moment, staring up at his building, knowing that something was different this time. My best friend had made it big. He had just signed a contract that would make his business a household name. But something was off. I pushed open the door, wiped my feet on the welcome mat, and rode the elevator to the penthouse. I had expected the evening to be one of celebration, but from the moment I stepped into Obi's apartment, I felt the tension. Obi sat by the window, staring out into the rain, a glass of whiskey clutched in his hand. The flickering lights from the city below cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more worn out than I'd ever seen him. "Obi," I called out, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to face me with a tired smile, but his eyes betrayed him. There was no joy behind them. He waved me in, and we sat down to talk. We clinked glasses to his success. But as the evening wore on, the celebratory mood grew thinner. His laughter, usually so genuine and contagious, felt forced. I knew something was wrong, but every time I tried to dig deeper, Obi would deflect the conversation back to the deal, back to business. I wasn't buying it. As we sat in awkward silence, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. I frowned. Obi hadn't mentioned expecting anyone else. He got up quickly, his movements tense, and opened the door. That's when I saw her. A tall, striking woman stood at the entrance, her long, elegant coat dripping rain onto the floor. Her name was Adana. I didn't know her, but the way Obi's face tightened when she stepped in made it clear that she wasn't just an ordinary guest. There was a history here, and it wasn't a pleasant one. "Who's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. But the atmosphere in the room had shifted the moment she arrived. "A friend," Obi replied quickly, too quickly. His eyes darted between us, and I could feel the unease in the air. Adana didn't say much. She just smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and joined us in the living room. The rest of the evening was a blur of awkward small talk. Adana kept her distance, but every now and then, her gaze would linger on Obi, and he would stiffen. It was like watching two actors in a play. There was a script here, but I didn't know the lines. Obi was struggling to keep up appearances, but the tension between them was impossible to ignore. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something much bigger than I realized. Who was this woman, and why did she have such a strong hold on Obi? I didn't have to wait long to find out. When the party finally ended and Adana left, I lingered for a while, sensing that something was going to happen. Sure enough, as I got up to leave, I overheard Obi and Adana's conversation at the door. They didn't see me standing nearby, just out of sight. "You shouldn't have come here," Obi said, his voice low and tense. "I had no choice," Adana replied, her tone icy. "You owe me." It was those three words, "you owe me," that sent a chill down my spine. The next few days passed in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Who was Adana? And what did she mean by "you owe me"? I asked Obi about her, of course, but he was evasive, brushing off my questions with vague, unconvincing answers. "She's just someone from my past," he kept saying, but his nervous energy made it clear that there was more to the story. Meanwhile, Adana wasn't going away. In fact, she started showing up everywhere, at Obi's office, at meetings, even at restaurants where we'd grab lunch. Each time, her presence seemed to tighten the knot of anxiety around Obi's neck. He was unraveling, and it was impossible to ignore. I decided to do some digging of my own. I reached out to a few contacts, people who knew Obi from back in the day when he was just starting out. What I discovered shocked me. Years ago, Obi had gotten involved in something illegal. Desperate to make a name for himself, he had fallen in with a group of con artists. Together, they ran a scheme that involved setting up fake businesses, forging documents, and scamming companies out of millions. It was a sophisticated operation, and they got away with it for a long time. Adana had been the mastermind behind it all. But when things started falling apart and the authorities began closing in, Obi had managed to slip away, disappearing just before the heat landed on him. He had walked away clean, leaving Adana and the others to take the fall. She had spent years in hiding, evading the law, while Obi built a legitimate business and a reputation. He had buried his past so deep that even his closest friends, like me, had never suspected a thing. Until now. Now Adana was back, and she wanted payback. She had been waiting for the right moment, watching from the shadows as Obi's success grew. And now, with everything he had on the line, she was ready to make her move. When I confronted Obi with what I had learned, he didn't deny it. In fact, The guilt was written all over his face. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair, his mind racing for a way out. But there wasn't one. I didn't think she'd come back, he muttered, his voice hoarse. I thought it was over.